What happens when a fashion designer with decades of runway authority decides to throw shade at a K-pop idol who commands millions? What if that idol belongs to Stray Kids, a group whose fandom, Stay, is notorious for turning Twitter into a digital war zone the second someone crosses the line? Here's the thing most people don't realize about the fashion industry and K-pop collision. It was never a smooth marriage. Designers from Milan to Paris have historically gay-kept their spaces, and when idols started sitting front row at Fashion Week, not everyone rolled out the red carpet. Some smiled for the cameras and whispered behind closed doors. Others? They said it out loud on interviews, on social media, in magazine columns. And every single time a designer aimed at a Stray Kids member, Stay didn't just clap back, they rewrote the narrative entirely. But which member got compared to a mannequin with no taste? Who was publicly called too street for high fashion? Which moment forced a luxury brand to issue an actual apology? And what Savage Stay campaign trended worldwide for 72 straight hours? 8 members. 8 moments. 8 wars that the fashion world never saw coming. Buckle up, this list starts at number 8, and trust me, by number 1, you won't believe how far a fandom can go when loyalty meets fury. Let's get into it. Number 8. I.N. The too young to be here dismissal, fashion's youngest target gets the last laugh. Let's rewind to a moment that most casual fans scrolled right past, but Stay remembered every single word. Picture this. A mid-tier European fashion showcase event in 2022, the kind where emerging designers flex their latest collections and celebrity guests fill the front row to generate buzz. Stray Kids' youngest member, Hyunjin, better known as I.N, was invited to attend as a guest representing the group's growing presence in the fashion world. At just 21 at the time, Hyunjin had already been turning heads with his surprisingly mature style choices on airport runways and red carpets. The kid who debuted as the adorable Magne of Stray Kids had evolved into someone who could pull off structured blazers, oversized silhouettes, and monochromatic fits that most guys his age wouldn't even attempt. He showed up looking sharp, poised, and ready to represent. But not everyone in that room saw what Stay saw. A creative director affiliated with the showcase, someone whose name circulated quickly on fashion Twitter after the incident, was caught on a behind-the-scenes live stream making a comment that roughly translated to, "Why do they keep sending these baby-faced pop kids to fashion events? This isn't a playground. He looks like he borrowed his father's suit." The remark wasn't scripted for drama. It wasn't part of some reality TV moment. It was a casual, offhand dismissal captured on audio while the creative director thought the microphone was picking up ambient sound, not conversation. But the internet has ears everywhere, and a Korean fashion blogger who was monitoring the stream clipped the audio, subtitled it, and uploaded it within the hour. The clip spread like wildfire across Korean and international fan spaces, and the reaction was immediate. Stay didn't just get angry, they got strategic. Within 12 hours of the clip surfacing, Stay accounts across Twitter, Weibo, and Instagram launched a coordinated campaign called Hyunjin Owns Fashion. The hashtag trended in South Korea, the United States, and 7 other countries. But here's what made this response different from a typical fandom outburst. Stay didn't just flood the tag with angry tweets. They turned it into a full-blown fashion retrospective. Fans compiled high-definition photo threads of every single outfit I.N had worn to public events over the previous 2 years, airport looks, concert fits, variety show appearances, magazine shoots, everything. They broke down the brands he wore, the styling choices he made, the way he mixed streetwear with high fashion in ways that felt effortless rather than forced. Fashion fan accounts analyzed his color palettes, his proportions, his ability to make even simple outfits look editorial. Some threads had over 50 images with detailed captions explaining why each look worked from a design perspective. It wasn't just a defense, it was a masterclass in visual argumentation. And the numbers backed them up. Within 48 hours, Hyunjin Owns Fashion had accumulated over 2.3 million tweets. Korean media outlets picked up the story, and several fashion commentators weighed in, noting that the creative director's comment reflected a broader bias in the European fashion establishment against young Asian male celebrities. One prominent Seoul-based fashion columnist wrote a piece arguing that I.N style actually demonstrated a more sophisticated understanding of contemporary menswear trends than many of the models walking in the showcase itself, a point that Stay amplified relentlessly. The creative director's team eventually released a vague statement expressing respect for all guests and attendees, which was widely interpreted as a non-apology apology. But by that point, the damage was done, not to I.N, but to the creative director's reputation in the Asian market. Several Korean and Japanese fashion influencers who had previously collaborated with the designer's brand publicly announced they would no longer promote their products, citing the disrespectful comments as the reason. The financial ripple was small but symbolic. You don't insult a member of one of the biggest fourth-generation K-pop groups and expect the Asian consumer market to shrug it off. What made this moment stick with Stay wasn't just the insult itself, it was what it represented. Hyunjin has always been the member who quietly grew up in front of the camera. He went from the shy, round-cheeked magne who sometimes struggled with confidence during early survival show episodes to a young man who carries himself with genuine grace. Fans who had watched that transformation over years took the dismissal personally, because they knew exactly how far he'd come. The baby-faced pop kid label wasn't just inaccurate, it was lazy. It reduced a multifaceted artist to a stereotype, and Stay wasn't having it. To this day, Hyunjin's fashion resurfaces every time I.N attends a fashion-related event. It became more than a clapback, it became a permanent archive of receipts. And Hyunjin himself? He never publicly addressed the comment. He just kept showing up, kept looking incredible, and kept letting his presence do the talking. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't a word, it's a walk. But if you think a dismissal based on age was harsh, wait until you hear what happened when a designer went after a Stray Kids member's actual vocal talent and tried to use fashion credibility to do it. Number 7 hits different. Number 7. Hyunjin. The pretty face, empty canvas controversy when high fashion tried to reduce an artist to a mannequin. Of all 8 members on this list, nobody sits closer to the intersection of K-pop and high fashion than Hyunjin, and nobody has attracted more unsolicited opinions from the fashion establishment because of it. By the time this incident unfolded, Hyunjin had already cemented himself as one of the most visually striking idols in the entire fourth generation. His face had graced magazine covers from Vogue Korea to Dazed. His airport fashion was dissected frame by style accounts with millions of followers. And his partnership with Versace as a brand ambassador had positioned him as a legitimate figure in the luxury fashion ecosystem, not just a celebrity guest, but someone the house actively wanted associated with their identity. Versace didn't pick Hyunjin because he was trending on Twitter. They picked him because his aesthetic, fluid, dramatic, unapologetically bold, aligned with the DNA of the brand. He could wear a silk-printed shirt with gold Baroque detailing and make it look like it was designed specifically for his frame. He could switch to a sharp, all-black tailored look and carry it with the kind of quiet intensity that runway photographers dream about. The fashion world noticed, and for the most part, the reception was warm. But not everyone was applauding. During a panel discussion at a European fashion forum in late 2023, an annual gathering where designers, editors, and creative directors discuss industry trends, a well-known creative consultant made a remark that cut through the polite atmosphere like a blade. When the conversation turned to the growing influence of K-pop idols in luxury fashion, the consultant, who had worked with multiple heritage brands across Milan and Paris, offered this take. Some of these idols are beautiful, sure. But beauty isn't fashion. A pretty face is an empty canvas. It doesn't mean the person understands the art. I've seen one particular idol from that Korean group, the one Versace uses, wearing pieces that are clearly styled by someone else's vision. Remove the stylist and what's left? A mannequin. The room reportedly went quiet. The consultant didn't name Hyunjin directly, but the reference to the one Versace uses left zero ambiguity. The comment was recorded by an attendee and transcribed in a recap article published by a niche European fashion journal. Within hours of that article going live, the quote was screenshot, translated into Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and Spanish, and detonated across every social media platform Stay occupies. Now, here's where you need to understand something about Hyunjin that the consultant clearly didn't. This is not a man who simply wears what he's told to wear. Hyunjin is a trained visual artist. He paints. He sketches. He has exhibited his artwork publicly and has spoken extensively in interviews about how he views fashion as an extension of artistic self-expression. He's referenced specific designers, specific collections, specific aesthetic movements in conversations that go far beyond surface-level celebrity name-dropping. When he talked about Versace's Spring 2023 collection in a behind-the-scenes video, he didn't just say, "It looks cool." He discussed the interplay between classical motifs and modern silhouettes, the tension between maximalism and restraint. This is someone who engages with fashion intellectually, not just visually. Stay knew all of this, and they weaponized that knowledge with surgical precision. The fan response wasn't a hashtag war this time, it was an art exhibition. Within 72 hours, Stay organized a digital campaign called Hyunjin is the Canvas, and the concept was brilliant. Fans created original artwork, digital illustrations, and mood boards that placed Hyunjin's fashion choices alongside the art movements and design philosophies that inspired them. One viral thread paired his Versace looks with Baroque paintings, demonstrating how his styling echoed historical artistic traditions. Another thread compiled every interview clip where Hyunjin discussed fashion in analytical terms, subtitled in multiple languages, proving that his engagement with the industry was cerebral, not cosmetic. Fashion students on Twitter and TikTok weighed in with video essays breaking down his understanding of color theory, fabric movement, and silhouette construction. The campaign trended globally for over 3 days, accumulating millions of impressions and catching the attention of actual fashion journalists. A senior editor at a major Korean fashion publication wrote a column titled "The Mannequin That Paints Back," arguing that the consultant's comment revealed a deeper insecurity within the traditional fashion establishment. A fear that K-pop idols weren't just borrowing fashion's prestige, but actively reshaping what fashion influence looks like in the 21st century. The piece went viral in its own right and was shared by several prominent fashion accounts. Versace's own social media team appeared to respond indirectly, posting a series of behind-the-scenes images from Hyunjin's most recent campaign shoot with the caption, "Art recognizes art," a line that Stay interpreted as a deliberate counterstatement. Whether it was intentional or coincidental, the timing was impossible to ignore. The creative consultant never publicly retracted the comment, but industry insiders noted that their presence at subsequent panels was notably reduced. And at least one scheduled collaboration with an Asian luxury retailer was quietly shelved in the months following the controversy. The financial calculus of the fashion industry is ruthless. If your words alienate a consumer base that spends billions annually on luxury goods, the market corrects you even if your peers won't. What resonated most deeply with Stay about this moment was the specific cruelty of calling someone an empty canvas. For a fandom that had watched Hyunjin pour his soul into every performance, every painting, every carefully considered outfit choice, the reduction of all that intentionality to mere physical beauty felt like an erasure of everything that makes him who he is. Hyunjin has spoken openly about his struggles with perfectionism, about the pressure of being perceived primarily through his appearance, about wanting to be recognized for his artistry rather than just his face. The consultant's remark landed on exactly that wound, and Stay's response was, in essence, a collective refusal to let anyone diminish the depth behind the beauty. Hyunjin, characteristically, said nothing publicly about the incident. But in a live broadcast weeks later, he mentioned offhandedly that he'd been painting more than usual and that sometimes the best answer to someone who doesn't understand art is to just keep making it. Stay clipped that moment, and it became one of the most shared fan clips of the entire year. But here's what's wild, at least Hyunjin's attacker tried to sound intellectual about it. The next moment on this list? A designer didn't even bother with subtlety. Straight-up public mockery, aimed at a member whose voice alone could have shut the whole room down. Number 6 is about to get loud. Number 6. Felix. The Cover Those Freckles demand, a designer who tried to erase what made him iconic. There are certain features in the K-pop industry that transcend the idol who carries them, features that become cultural symbols, conversation starters, identity markers that millions of fans around the world associate with warmth, authenticity, and unapologetic individuality. Felix's freckles are exactly that. Those tiny constellations scattered across his nose and cheeks have inspired fan art exhibitions, tattoo designs, makeup tutorials, and countless emotional essays from fans who saw a public figure embrace a feature that mainstream Asian beauty standards have historically pressured people to conceal. Felix didn't always feel that way about them. Early in his career, stylists frequently covered his freckles with heavy foundation and concealer, standard practice in an industry obsessed with porcelain-smooth skin. But over time, as Stay vocally celebrated his natural face and Felix himself grew more confident, the freckles became his signature. They showed up uncovered in magazine editorials, music video close-ups, and live broadcasts where Felix would sit bare-faced and radiant, looking like a Renaissance painting brought to life with a voice deeper than the ocean floor beneath it. By 2023, Felix's relationship with fashion had escalated significantly. His connection with Louis Vuitton had positioned him among the upper echelon of K-pop's fashion ambassadors, and his editorial work was earning praise not just from fans, but from stylists and photographers who recognized that his look, ethereal, androgynous, freckled, impossibly warm, was genuinely rare in the modeling and celebrity world. He wasn't just another pretty idol filling a seat at Fashion Week. He was a visual experience. So when a makeup creative director working with a luxury brand's regional campaign made a comment during a pre-shoot briefing that was later leaked by a staff member present in the room, the fallout was both predictable and devastating. According to the account, which was shared anonymously on a Korean industry forum before being picked up by entertainment news outlets, the creative director reviewed reference photos of Felix and said, in front of multiple team members, "The freckles need to go. All of them. I don't care what his fans think, this is a luxury campaign, not a beach holiday photo. Cover everything. I want clean skin. We're selling elegance, not imperfections." The word that set the internet on fire wasn't cover or clean. It was imperfections. That single word carried the weight of every beauty standard Felix and his fans had spent years pushing back against. The staff member who leaked the account reportedly did so because they were personally upset by the remark, noting that Felix had been nothing but professional and kind during every interaction, and that dismissing his most recognizable feature as an imperfection felt unnecessarily cruel. The leak hit social media on a Thursday evening in Seoul, and by Friday morning, Stay had turned it into one of the most emotionally charged fan campaigns in recent K-pop memory. The hashtag Felix Freckles Are Art didn't just trend, it dominated. Across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Weibo, fans uploaded tens of thousands of posts celebrating freckles as a feature of beauty, using Felix as the centerpiece, but expanding the conversation into a broader cultural statement about skin diversity and the narrow definitions of elegance that the luxury fashion world often enforces. Dermatologists and skincare influencers joined the conversation, pointing out that freckles are a natural genetic trait caused by melanin clusters and have absolutely nothing to do with skin health or cleanliness. Makeup artists with professional credentials posted videos explaining that in contemporary high fashion, freckles are increasingly celebrated, not concealed, citing campaigns from Gucci, Chanel, and Burberry that had specifically chosen freckled models to challenge outdated beauty norms. The irony of a luxury brand creative director calling freckles imperfections while the industry's most progressive houses were actively spotlighting them was not lost on anyone. Stay didn't stop at social media defense. A group of fan accounts with significant followings organized a letter-writing campaign directed at the brand's corporate communications department, articulating, in professional, measured language, why the creative director's comment was not only personally offensive to Felix and his fans, but commercially short-sighted. The letters argued that Felix's freckles were a core part of his brand appeal, that concealing them would undermine the authenticity, that made him a valuable ambassador in the first place, and that consumers in the Asian beauty market were increasingly rejecting the flawless skin-only paradigm. Several letters included market research data that fans had compiled independently, showing that social media engagement on Felix's posts was consistently highest when his freckles were visible. A data-driven argument that reframed the conversation from aesthetics to business strategy. The brand's response came quietly but meaningfully. The final campaign images, when they were eventually released, featured Felix with his freckles fully visible, not just uncovered, but seemingly highlighted, with lighting that accentuated the natural pattern across his skin. No public statement was made addressing the leaked comment, but the visual evidence spoke louder than any press release could. Industry observers interpreted the decision as a direct course correction, likely driven by internal pushback after the controversy reached the brand's senior leadership. The creative director's name did not appear in the campaign credits, and while no official termination or reassignment was announced, their social media presence went dark for several weeks following the incident. Felix addressed the moment in his own way during a live broadcast about a month after the campaign photos dropped. He was removing his makeup on camera, something he does occasionally to the delight of fans who love seeing his unfiltered self. As the foundation came off and his freckles emerged, he touched his cheek, smiled, and said in his trademark deep voice, "I used to want to hide these. Now they're my favorite part of my face." Funny how that works. The chat exploded. Fans cried. Clips of that moment were viewed over 20 million times across platforms within a week. What the creative director failed to understand, what so many gatekeepers in the beauty and fashion industries still fail to understand, is that the era of erasing uniqueness to fit a mold is ending. Felix's freckles aren't a flaw to fix. They're a statement. They say, "I am not here to look like everyone else. I am here to look like me." And the millions of fans who see themselves reflected in that statement, fans with freckles, with birthmarks, with scars, with any feature they've ever been told to hide, those fans will defend that statement with a ferocity that no creative director's brief can overrule. Stay proved that. Felix proved it just by showing up as himself. Now you might think targeting someone's physical features is as low as it gets. But the next entry on this list goes somewhere even more personal. A designer who didn't just critique the look, but publicly questioned whether a Stray Kids member even belonged in the same room as real creatives. Number 5 cuts deep. Number 5. Changbin. The wrong body for fashion remark when a designer mocked the build that broke every mold. The fashion industry has a body problem, and everybody knows it. For decades, the runway has worshipped one silhouette above all others, tall, razor-thin, angular, almost architectural in its absence of mass. Male models are expected to look like elongated sketches, narrow shoulders, slim waists, legs that go on forever, the kind of frame that allows fabric to drape without resistance. It's a standard that has been challenged, debated, and criticized for years, yet somehow still persists in the unspoken rules of who gets invited, who gets dressed, and who gets taken seriously in high fashion spaces. Seo Changbin was never going to fit that mold, and that's precisely what makes his presence in those spaces so important and so threatening to the people who built those rules. Changbin is built different, and that's not a metaphor. Among Stray Kids members, he stands out physically compact, muscular, broad-shouldered, with a frame that speaks to years of disciplined training and an obvious pride in physical strength. In a K-pop industry that still largely favors lean, willowy male bodies, Changbin has carved out space for a different kind of visual identity. He doesn't hide his build under oversized layers. He wears fitted jackets that show his shoulders. He rolls up sleeves to reveal forearms that look like they belong to an athlete, not an idol. And he does it all with a confidence that radiates from every red carpet photo and every stage entrance. His fans have celebrated this endlessly, creating entire appreciation threads dedicated to his physique, his workout routines, and the way he challenges K-pop's often restrictive beauty standards simply by existing as himself. So when a designer connected to a collaborative fashion event in Seoul made a comment that reduced all of that to a punchline, the reaction was nothing short of volcanic. The incident occurred during a fitting session for a multi-artist fashion showcase in mid-2023, where several K-pop acts were being dressed by a team of designers for a televised special. According to accounts from staff members who were present, accounts that surfaced on Korean online communities within days, a designer responsible for coordinating outfits looked at Changbin's measurements, compared them to the sample sizes available, and reportedly said to a colleague in what they assumed was a private aside, "This one is impossible. He's shaped like a gym trainer, not a model. Who approved this? I can't make couture work on a body that fights the fabric." The comment might have stayed buried in the backstage chaos of a hectic fitting session if it hadn't been overheard by a junior stylist who was a stay herself. She didn't leak the exact quote immediately. That came later through a carefully anonymized post on a Korean forum, but she did post a cryptic tweet that night saying, "Some people in this industry don't deserve the artists who show up for them," followed by a subtle Changbin emoji. Stay, with the investigative instincts of a fandom that has been battle-tested by years of online warfare, connected the dots within hours. The forum post detailing the fitting room comment appeared the next day, and the firestorm ignited. What made this particular insult land so hard was the phrase "fights the fabric." In fashion terminology, that's not just a practical observation about tailoring, it's a value judgment. It implies that the body is the problem, not the clothing. It frames muscular builds as adversarial to design, as obstacles rather than canvases. And in doing so, it reinforces one of the most toxic hierarchies in the fashion world, the idea that certain bodies are inherently more worthy of beautiful clothing than others. Stay dismantled that idea with methodical fury. The campaign that emerged, Changbin Body of Work, was a masterclass in reframing a narrative. Fans flooded social media with high-resolution images of Changbin in every conceivable outfit, demonstrating that his build didn't fight fashion, it elevated it. Fitted blazers looked powerful on his shoulders rather than simply structured. Streetwear gained an edge of raw physicality that leaner frames couldn't replicate. Even softer, more fluid pieces, silk shirts, loose trousers, draped layers, created a compelling visual contrast against his muscular frame, producing a tension between softness and strength that any competent designer should have recognized as editorial gold. Fashion-focused fan accounts went further, compiling examples of luxury brands that had actively embraced muscular and athletic male bodies in recent campaigns. Versace's campaigns featuring athletes, Louis Vuitton's broader range of male model body types, and the general industry shift toward body diversity were all cited as evidence that the designer's mindset was not just offensive but outdated. One particularly viral thread featured side-by-side comparisons of Changbin's proportions with those of celebrated male fashion icons from different eras. From the broad-shouldered Hollywood leading men of the 1950s who defined masculine elegance to contemporary style icons who proved that fashion looks best when it adapts to the body wearing it, not the other way around. The numbers behind Changbin Body of Work were staggering. Over 1.8 million tweets in the first 48 hours, trending in 14 countries, and picked up by Korean entertainment media outlets that ran stories framing the incident as part of a larger conversation about body inclusivity in the K-pop fashion pipeline. A prominent Korean fitness magazine invited Changbin for a feature spread, not as a response to the controversy specifically, but the timing was conspicuous, and the resulting photos became some of the most shared images of him that year. He looked phenomenal, and every comment section was filled with stay, reminding the world that this was the body someone called impossible to dress. The designer at the center of the controversy never issued a public apology. Their name was never officially confirmed, though industry insiders narrowed it down enough that the professional consequences were real. Several stylists who worked in adjacent circles publicly distanced themselves, and at least one planned collaboration with a K-pop management company was reportedly cancelled in the aftermath. The message was clear: the K-pop market is too valuable, and its fandoms too vigilant for casual body shaming to go unpunished. Changbin himself addressed the topic obliquely during a fan sign event weeks later. When a fan told him they admired how confident he was in his body, he smiled and said something that Stay has since turned into a widely shared quote graphic. "I didn't build this body for a runway. I built it for the stage." If someone's clothes can't handle that, maybe they need to make better clothes. The crowd erupted. The quote went viral. And somewhere, a designer who thought a gym trainer's body couldn't carry couture watched an idol prove that the most unforgettable fashion statements aren't made by bodies that disappear inside the clothes. They're made by bodies that dare to fill them completely. But muscle and measurements are one thing. What happens when a designer doesn't attack how a member looks, but goes after something even more untouchable? Number 4 takes aim at identity itself, and Stay's response rewrote the rules of fan activism overnight. Number 4, Seungmin, the forgettable one label. A designer ranked the members and learned why you never pick favorites. Every group has a member the industry underestimates, and in Stray Kids, that target has landed on Kim Seungmin more times than any fair-minded observer should tolerate. It's a pattern rooted in a shallow misunderstanding of what presence actually means in fashion and performance. Seungmin doesn't command attention the way Hyunjin does with sculptural bone structure, or the way Felix does with otherworldly freckles and a voice from another dimension. His appeal operates on a different frequency, quieter, steadier, the kind of visual identity that reveals itself slowly and then never leaves your memory once it registers. He's the member whose airport photos make you stop scrolling because something about the simplicity just works. A white button-down, tailored trousers, minimal accessories. On anyone else, it might read as safe. On Seungmin, it reads as intentional. There's a precision to his style that mirrors his precision as a vocalist. Every note placed exactly where it belongs, every outfit assembled with a clarity that refuses to beg for attention because it doesn't need to. But the fashion world, with its addiction to the loud and the extreme, doesn't always reward restraint. And in late 2023, a moment unfolded that crystallized everything wrong with how the industry assigns value to idols based on visual spectacle rather than substance. A fashion content creator, someone who had built a following by ranking and reviewing K-pop idols' fashion at events, posted a video that went beyond the usual lighthearted commentary and crossed into territory that Stay found unforgivable. The video, uploaded to YouTube and simultaneously clipped for Instagram and TikTok, was a tier list ranking of Stray Kids members' fashion identity. Each member was categorized into tiers from S to C based on their perceived style impact, red carpet presence, and brand association value. Hyunjin landed in S tier. Felix in S tier. Minho and Changbin in A tier. Han and Bang Chan in B tier. I.N in B tier. And Seungmin? He was placed in C tier alone, with the creator's commentary delivering the blow that ignited the war. Honestly, Seungmin is the forgettable one when it comes to fashion. He doesn't have a signature. No statement pieces, no risks, no brand affiliation that screams high fashion. If you lined up all 8 members at a fashion event and asked a designer who they'd want to dress, he'd be picked last. He's like background noise in a room full of main characters. Background noise. In a room full of main characters. The words dripped with the kind of casual cruelty that content creators sometimes mistake for honest analysis. And while the creator wasn't technically a fashion designer in the traditional sense, their platform had enough reach and their positioning as a fashion authority was established enough that the video functioned as an industry-adjacent judgment, the kind that shapes public perception and, by extension, brand opportunities. Stay's response was unlike anything the creator had likely anticipated. This wasn't just a wave of angry comments or a report bombing campaign. This was a fandom that took the word forgettable and turned it into a monument. The hashtag #SeungminUnforgettable launched within hours, and the content that followed was extraordinary in its depth and emotional resonance. Stay compiled a comprehensive visual archive of Seungmin's fashion evolution, from debut era to present, organized chronologically to demonstrate something the tier list completely ignored: growth. Fans showed how Seungmin's style had matured from the standard idol uniform of his rookie years into a refined, minimalist aesthetic that fashion commentators would recognize as firmly aligned with the quiet luxury movement that had been dominating global fashion discourse throughout 2023 and into 2024. The irony was almost poetic, at the exact cultural moment when the fashion world was collectively pivoting toward understated elegance. When Loro Piana and the Row and Brunello Cucinelli were being hailed as the peak of sophistication precisely because they didn't scream for attention, a self-proclaimed fashion authority was penalizing Seungmin for embodying that exact philosophy. Stay didn't just point out the irony. They built cases around it. One fan who studied fashion merchandising created a 30-slide presentation analyzing Seungmin's wardrobe choices through the lens of contemporary menswear trends, demonstrating that his preference for clean lines, neutral palettes, and quality fabrics over logo-heavy statement pieces reflected a more advanced understanding of personal style than the flashier choices that typically earn S-tier rankings in superficial assessments. The presentation went viral, shared not just within Stay spaces, but across general fashion discussion forums where non-fans engaged with the analysis on its merits. Another fan, a professional photographer, created a portrait series inspired by Seungmin's aesthetic, shooting models in Seungmin-inspired outfits against minimalist backdrops to demonstrate how his style translated into editorial-quality imagery. The series was featured on several photography and fashion accounts with substantial followings, introducing Seungmin's visual identity to audiences who had never watched a Stray Kids music video but immediately understood the appeal. Korean fashion media picked up the story within days, and the coverage was overwhelmingly sympathetic to Seungmin and critical of the tier list format as a whole. One editorial argued that ranking idols' fashion identities in a linear hierarchy fundamentally misunderstands how personal style works, that fashion isn't a competition with a single axis of value, and that reducing an idol's entire aesthetic identity to a letter grade based on how loudly their outfits demand attention perpetuates the same shallow metrics that have plagued the industry for decades. The piece specifically praised Seungmin's style as the rarest commodity in an oversaturated visual landscape, genuine restraint that still communicates personality. The content creator who posted the original video faced a backlash so sustained and multifaceted that the video was eventually taken down, not by the platform, but by the creator themselves, who posted a follow-up acknowledging that the C-tier ranking was reductive and that the commentary about Seungmin being forgettable was poorly worded and unfair. The retraction was widely viewed as too little, too late, but Stay noted it as evidence that sustained, articulate pushback, not just rage, but reasoned argumentation could actually shift narratives. Seungmin's response to the whole affair was peak Seungmin, completely unbothered, at least on the surface. During a variety show appearance shortly after the controversy peaked, a host complimented his outfit, a perfectly fitted navy blazer over a crisp white tee, and Seungmin responded with a slight smile and said, "I just wear what feels right. I don't really think about rankings." Stay turned that clip into a rallying cry. The quote was screen-printed on fan-made merchandise, embedded in fan edits, and cited in think pieces about the difference between style and spectacle. What the tier list got catastrophically wrong was the assumption that being quiet means being empty. Seungmin's fashion identity isn't absent, it's deliberate. Every clean line is a choice. Every muted tone is a statement. He dresses like someone who knows exactly who he is and feels no compulsion to prove it through visual volume. In a world that constantly rewards the loudest voice in the room, Seungmin is the one who walks in, says nothing, and somehow becomes the person everyone remembers when the room is empty. That's not C-tier. That's mastery. And Stay made sure the entire internet understood the difference. You'd think after all these moments, designers and fashion voices would have learned the lesson by now. Don't come for Stray Kids unless you're ready for the consequences. But number 3 proves that some people never learn, especially when they aim their words at a member whose duality has been confusing the fashion world since day one. Number 3 Lino, the confused aesthetic attack, when a designer called his duality a fashion crisis. If you've spent more than 5 minutes studying Lee Minho, stage name Lino, You already understand that trying to categorize him is an exercise in beautiful futility. He is, by every measurable standard, the most aesthetically unpredictable member of Stray Kids. One day, he shows up at an event wearing a tailored Thom Browne-inspired ensemble with cropped trousers and polished loafers, looking like he just stepped off a yacht in Monaco. The next day, he's spotted at the airport in an oversized vintage hoodie, baggy cargo pants, a bucket hat pulled low, and sneakers that look like he grabbed them from a thrift store bin without checking the size. He wears luxury and streetwear and editorial high fashion with the same unsettling ease, as if the concept of a signature style is a prison he simply refuses to enter. His Instagram posts oscillate between moody, cinematic self-portraits that belong in a gallery and chaotic, blurry selfies with his 3 cats that look like they were taken mid-sneeze. He is elegant and absurd in equal measure, often simultaneously, and that duality, the very thing that makes him magnetic to millions, is precisely what one fashion designer decided to publicly ridicule. The incident traces back to a fashion industry podcast that aired in early 2024, hosted by a collective of designers and creative consultants who regularly discuss the intersection of celebrity culture and luxury branding. The podcast had a modest but influential listenership among industry professionals, and its format encouraged unfiltered opinions, a setup that typically produces entertaining discourse, but occasionally veers into reckless territory. During an episode focused on K-pop idols as fashion ambassadors, the panel discussed several groups before landing on Stray Kids. Most of the commentary was standard fare, acknowledgement of Hyunjin's Versace connection, praise for Felix's editorial presence, but when Lee No's name came up, one panelist, a mid-career designer who had worked with several European fashion houses, delivered a critique that would become the most clipped segment in the podcast's history. Lee No is a perfect example of someone who has access to incredible fashion resources, but no coherent vision for how to use them, the designer said. His style is a contradiction. One week, he looks like he's auditioning for a Prada campaign. The next week, he looks like he got dressed in the dark. It's not eclectic. Eclectic implies intentionality. This is confused. It's like he's wearing a different identity every time you see him, and none of them feel real. If I were advising him, I'd say, pick a lane. Fashion rewards consistency. Right now, he's a mood board that got shuffled and nobody bothered to reorganize it. A mood board that got shuffled. The analogy was vivid, quotable, and, in Stay's collective assessment, spectacularly wrong. The clip was extracted from the podcast within hours of the episode's release, subtitled in Korean, Japanese, Mandarin, and Spanish, and distributed across every platform where Stay operates. And then something remarkable happened. Instead of a single unified hashtag campaign, the response splintered into dozens of simultaneous creative movements, each approaching the defense from a different angle. As if Lee No's own stylistic diversity had infected the fandom strategy. One faction launched Lee No Lanes, a campaign built around the central argument that the designer's insistence on picking a lane was philosophically bankrupt. Fashion history, they argued, is defined by figures who refuse to be categorized. David Bowie, whose style shifted so dramatically between eras that each phase could belong to a different person entirely. Rihanna, who moves between streetwear, haute couture, and avant-garde with a fluidity that no one has ever called confused. Timothée Chalamet, whose red carpet choices veer from classic tailoring to experimental androgyny without anyone questioning his fashion credibility. Why Stay demanded was the same freedom of expression that elevated Western celebrities into style icons being pathologized as confusion when a Korean idol exercised it. The thread compiling these comparisons exceeded 200 retweets per minute at its peak and was cited by multiple fashion journalists as one of the most intellectually rigorous fan-driven fashion critiques they'd encountered. Another faction took a more visceral approach, flooding social media with what became known as the Lee No Duality Challenge. Fans posted side-by-side images of Lee No in his most contrasting outfits, luxury editorial next to chaotic airport casual, dark moody staging, looks next to bright playful variety show fits, captioned with variations of, "This isn't confusion. This is range." The challenge spread beyond stay into general K-pop fan spaces and even attracted participation from fans of other groups who recognized the designer's critique as reflective of a broader industry bias against artistic versatility. The visual evidence was overwhelming. Image after image demonstrated that Lino didn't dress randomly, he dressed contextually. His outfit choices reflected mood, setting, purpose, and personality with a specificity that required more thought, not less, than simply adhering to a single aesthetic formula. The designer's accusation of inconsistency collapsed under the weight of evidence showing that Lino's style was, in fact, remarkably consistent in one crucial way: it was always authentic to the moment. A third wave of response came from professional stylists and fashion students who used the controversy as a teaching moment. Multiple TikTok creators with fashion industry backgrounds posted analysis videos arguing that the designer's advice to pick a lane reflected an outdated approach to personal branding, one rooted in the pre-social media era when public figures needed a fixed visual identity because they had limited opportunities to be seen. In the age of Instagram, TikTok, and constant content creation, the ability to shift between aesthetics is not a weakness, but a competitive advantage. Audiences don't want to see the same look recycled endlessly. They want surprise. They want evolution. They want what Lino delivers instinctively, the thrill of never knowing what's coming next. The podcast eventually addressed the backlash in a subsequent episode, though the designer in question was notably absent from the panel. The host acknowledged that the commentary had generated significant discussion and offered a diplomatic clarification that personal style is subjective and there are many valid approaches to fashion expression. A statement so carefully neutral that it satisfied absolutely no one, but served as a de facto admission that the original critique had crossed a line. Industry fallout was subtle but measurable. The designer's social media following, which had been growing steadily before the incident, flatlined and then declined as Korean and Southeast Asian followers, many of whom had discovered the account through K-pop fashion content, unfollowed in coordinated waves. A planned guest appearance at a Seoul fashion conference was quietly removed from the event's promotional materials, though organizers cited scheduling conflicts rather than controversy. Lino, in the way that is so uniquely and infuriatingly him, never acknowledged the situation publicly. He didn't need to. In the weeks following the podcast incident, his social media posts seemed to lean even harder into stylistic unpredictability, almost as if he was daring anyone to comment. A formal black suit at a brand event on Monday. A neon windbreaker and track pants at dance practice on Wednesday. A delicate floral print shirt with tailored shorts on a weekend outing with his cats. Each post was met with stay flooding the comments with "pick a lane" in sarcastic quotation marks, turning the designer's own words into a fandom inside joke that celebrated exactly what it was meant to criticize. What the designer fundamentally misread about Lino was the assumption that consistency equals identity. For some people, identity isn't a fixed point, it's a spectrum. Lino doesn't dress to build a brand. He dresses to express whatever version of himself exists in that moment, and the fact that those versions range from ice-cold runway prints to chaotic cat dad in a hoodie isn't a flaw in his fashion sense. It's the most honest form of self-expression possible. He is not a mood board that got shuffled. He is every mood on the board, all at once, and the fashion world's inability to process that complexity says far more about the industry's limitations than it does about his. Still think that was intense? Number 2 goes somewhere nobody expected, a moment where the insult wasn't whispered backstage or buried in a podcast, but delivered directly, publicly, to a member whose raw emotional honesty has made him one of the most beloved voices in all of K-pop. And Stay's response? It didn't just trend. It made headlines. Number 2, Han, the not the face for this industry verdict, a public humiliation that backfired spectacularly. Han Jisung has never pretended to be untouchable. In a world of carefully constructed idol personas, of flawless media training and practice nonchalance, Han has always been the member who lets the cracks show, not because he's weak, but because he's brave enough to be real. He's spoken publicly about anxiety. He's cried on camera and never apologized for it. He's written lyrics about self-doubt, about the pressure of being watched, about the days when getting out of bed feels like the hardest thing in the world. That vulnerability is precisely what has made him one of the most deeply loved figures in fourth-generation K-pop. Stay doesn't just admire Han, they protect him with a ferocity that borders on sacred, because they understand that his openness is a gift, one that has helped countless fans feel less alone in their own struggles. So when a fashion designer didn't just question his style, but publicly attacked his appearance, his face, his features, the physical reality of who he is, the explosion that followed wasn't just fandom anger. It was something closer to collective grief turning into collective war. The moment happened at a fashion gala in Asia in mid-2024, a high-profile event where designers, celebrities, and media figures mingled in that performative ecosystem of air kisses and champagne flutes. Several Stray Kids members attended as invited guests, and by all accounts, the evening was proceeding without incident until a post-event interview surfaced online. A designer, not an emerging name, but someone with legitimate credentials and connections to established fashion houses, was filmed in a casual media scrum outside the venue, answering questions about the evening's standout looks. When asked which K-pop idols had impressed them, the designer listed several names from different groups, praised a few outfits in generic terms, and then, when a reporter specifically asked about Stray Kids Han, delivered a response that would become one of the most infamous sound bites in K-pop fashion history. Han? He's talented, I'm sure. But fashion is visual, and let's be honest, some faces are made for this industry and some aren't. He has very animated features. Expressive, yes. But high fashion needs symmetry, bone structure, a certain stillness. His face moves too much. It's distracting. He'd be great in comedy, maybe variety shows, but on a red carpet next to a couture piece? The garment should be the star, and with a face like that, you're not sure what the audience is looking at. The clip was 23 seconds long. 23 seconds that detonated across the internet with the force of a cultural bomb. A face like that. Some faces are made for this industry and some aren't. His face moves too much. Each phrase was dissected, quoted, screen-capped, and condemned in a cascade of outrage that started in Korean fans' faces and radiated outward within the hour to every corner of the global Stay community. The raw cruelty of the comments was staggering not just in content, but in context. This was said on camera, at a public event, about a person who has been openly vulnerable about the psychological toll of being judged by appearance in an industry that scrutinizes every angle of your face under HD lights and trending hashtags. For fans who knew about Han's anxiety, who had watched him describe in intimate detail how difficult it is to feel watched and evaluated constantly, the designer's words landed like a knife aimed at the exact place where the wound was deepest. Stay's response unfolded in 3 simultaneous waves, each more devastating to the designer than the last. The first wave was emotional, a flood of testimonials from fans around the world sharing what Han's face, his expressions, his unguarded emotional transparency meant to them personally. Thousands of posts described how seeing an idol who didn't mask his feelings behind a cool, detached facade had given them permission to be expressive, to be animated, to take up space with their emotions instead of shrinking into the stillness that the designer seemed to worship. The hashtag #HanFace of Courage trended worldwide within 3 hours, and the emotional weight of the campaign was so potent that even non-Stay K-pop fans joined in solidarity, recognizing that the designer's words reflected a toxicity that threatened every idol, not just Han. The second wave was analytical, and it struck at the intellectual foundation of the designer's argument with surgical precision. Fashion historians and enthusiasts within Stay dismantled the claim that high fashion demands symmetry and stillness by compiling a visual history of the most iconic faces in fashion, faces celebrated precisely for their distinctiveness, their irregularity, their refusal to conform to classical symmetry. They pointed to models like Lindsay Wixon, whose distinctive lip and unconventional proportions made her a Prada and Chanel favorite. They cited the rise of character faces in fashion, the industry's own term for models whose appeal lies in their uniqueness rather than their adherence to traditional beauty metrics. They showed campaigns from Gucci under Alessandro Michele, where casting deliberately prioritized expressive, unusual, emotionally charged faces over blank canvas symmetry. The evidence was incontrovertible. The designer's definition of a fashion face was not only subjective, it was contradicted by the very industry they claimed to represent. One viral thread, compiled by a stay who worked as a professional makeup artist, analyzed Han's facial structure in technical terms, his jawline definition, his eye shape, his proportional ratios, and concluded that his features were not only well-suited for editorial photography, but actively more interesting than many of the conventionally symmetric faces the designer would presumably consider ideal. The thread was shared by several beauty industry professionals and accumulated hundreds of thousands of views. The third wave was economic, and it was the one that left a permanent mark. Stay organized a targeted but disciplined campaign contacting brands associated with the designer, expressing in professional language why the designer's comments were not only offensive, but represented a liability for any brand seeking to engage the Asian consumer market. Fan-organized emails and social media messages cited the designer's exact quotes, provided context about Han's cultural significance, and noted that association with someone who publicly body-shamed a beloved idol carried reputational risk. Within a week, 2 brand partnerships that had featured the designer's name in upcoming promotional materials were quietly revised. The designer's personal Instagram, which had maintained a modest but active following, lost over 12,000 followers in 10 days, a number that might seem small in the influencer economy, but represented a significant portion of their Asian audience. A Seoul-based fashion PR agency that had previously engaged the designer for consulting work issued a statement saying they were re-evaluating partnerships to ensure alignment with values of inclusivity and respect. Corporate language that everyone understood as a direct consequence of the controversy. The designer posted a statement on Instagram stories, not a permanent post, but a disappearing story, which Stay interpreted as cowardice, expressing regret for any offense caused, and clarifying that the comments were taken out of context and did not reflect personal animosity toward any individual. Stay was unimpressed by the passive construction, any offense caused rather than the offensive thing I said, and screenshot the story before it vanished, adding it to the permanent archive of receipts that K-pop fandoms maintain with the meticulousness of federal prosecutors. Han addressed the situation in the most Han jisung way possible, during a late-night V-Live broadcast, sitting cross-legged on his bed with messy hair and a hoodie, talking softly to the camera as if he were having a private conversation with every single Stay simultaneously. He didn't name the designer. He didn't reference the specific incident. But he said something that shattered every heart in the chat. Sometimes people say things about how you look, and even when you tell yourself it doesn't matter, it still sits in your chest for a while. It's heavy. But then I read what you guys write to me, and the heaviness gets lighter. I'm not the kind of person who can pretend things don't hurt. But I'm also not the kind of person who lets the hurt win. My face does move a lot, right? He laughed, that bright, full-body laugh that crinkles his entire face and makes his eyes disappear into half-moons of pure joy. Good. That means I'm alive. I'd rather have a face that shows everything I feel than one that shows nothing at all. The broadcast was watched live by over 400,000 people. The clip of that final statement was viewed over 35 million times across platforms within a month. It was translated into more than 20 languages. It was quoted in articles about mental health, about beauty standards, about the power of vulnerability in public life. And somewhere in that wave of love and defiance, the designer's 23-second soundbite became exactly what Han described in the most poetic possible terms, a heaviness that didn't win. We've seen backstage whispers, podcast takedowns, public humiliations, and social media demolitions, but nothing on this list prepared anyone for number 1. The final entry isn't just the hottest moment a fashion designer insulted a Stray Kids member. It's the moment that changed how the entire industry treats K-pop idols at fashion events. And the member at the center? The leader himself. Number 1 Bang Chan, the go back to your music videos confrontation. The night a leader's silence roared louder than an entire industry. This is the one. The moment that every entry on this list has been building toward. The moment that didn't just expose a single designer's arrogance, it cracked open a fault line in the relationship between the global fashion establishment and the K-pop industry that had been trembling under pressure for years. And at the center of it stood Christopher Bangchan, the leader of Stray Kids, the man who has spent his entire career absorbing hits so his members don't have to, a man whose composure under fire has become the stuff of K-pop legend. Tested now in a setting that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with power. The event was a major Fashion Week showcase in Europe in early 2024, not a secondary event, not a regional showing, but one of the premier gatherings on the global fashion calendar where the front row operates as a living hierarchy of cultural influence. Stray Kids had been invited to attend as a group, their presence reflecting the undeniable reality that K-pop acts had become the most photographed, most discussed, most socially amplified guests at any fashion week worldwide. Brands understood the math. A single Instagram post from a top-tier K-pop idol attending your show could generate more engagement than the entire collection's media coverage combined. The seats were strategic. The invitations were calculated. And yet, beneath the polished surface of mutual benefit, a resentment had been simmering among certain corners of the old guard fashion world. A bitterness rooted in the feeling that these idols hadn't earned their front row seats through fashion credibility, but through sheer fan numbers, that they were marketing tools rather than genuine participants in the culture of design. That resentment found its voice on a night that began with flashbulbs and champagne and ended with a controversy that reshaped industry protocol. The incident occurred not during the show itself, but at a private after-party, an exclusive gathering where designers, editors, buyers, and select celebrity guests mingled in the kind of intimate setting where guards come down and truths slip out. Bangchan attended alongside several members, and by multiple accounts, he was his usual self, polite, warm, genuinely interested in the people he spoke with, asking thoughtful questions about design processes and creative inspirations in his fluent English, an asset that distinguished him from many K-pop idols at international events and allowed him to engage directly without interpretation barriers. Several attendees later described him as one of the most pleasant and intellectually curious guests at the party. But not everyone received him that way. A senior designer, someone whose name carried decades of industry weight, whose opinion could open or close doors for emerging talent, whose position in the fashion hierarchy was unassailable enough that they apparently felt immune to consequences, was overheard in a conversation with a small cluster of industry peers making remarks about the K-pop presence at the event that escalated from dismissive to explicitly hostile. Multiple witnesses provided accounts that aligned closely enough to reconstruct the exchange with confidence. The designer reportedly gestured toward the area where the Stray Kids members were mingling and said, "Look at them. They don't know what they're looking at. They don't understand the fabric, the construction, the heritage. They're here because they're fans by things, that's it. It's a transaction, not participation." That leader, the one who speaks English, he's the worst, actually, because he tries to engage like he belongs. At least the others are honest about being tourists. He acts like he's one of us. Someone should tell him, "Go back to your music videos. This isn't your world." The words were delivered with the confidence of someone who believed they were among peers who shared the sentiment, an assumption that proved catastrophically wrong. Among the small group listening was a junior editor from a fashion publication who was both appalled by the comments and aware of their newsworthiness. The editor didn't record the remarks, but documented them in detailed notes that same night and, after careful deliberation, shared a sanitized but unmistakable account in a column published 3 days later. The column didn't name the designer directly, but provided enough contextual detail, the event, the timing, the reference to the one who speaks English, that industry insiders and K-pop fans alike identified the source within hours. The article went nuclear. Not just within Stay, across the entire K-pop fandom ecosystem. Because what the designer said about Bangchan wasn't just an insult to one idol or one group. It was a distillation of every gatekeeping instinct, every xenophobic undertone, every cultural elitism that K-pop acts had quietly endured at fashion events for years. Go back to your music videos wasn't fashion criticism. It was a border wall disguised as aesthetic judgment. It said, "You are not one of us, you will never be one of us, and your attempt to participate in our world is an intrusion." Stay's response was the largest, most coordinated, and most consequential fan campaign on this entire list. The hashtag Bangchan belongs everywhere didn't just trend, it became a cultural event unto itself, sustained across multiple days with a breadth and depth that transcended typical fandom activity. Within the first 24 hours, the hashtag accumulated over 4 million tweets. Within 72 hours, it had been used over 11 million times across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Weibo, trending simultaneously in over 30 countries, a number that placed it among the highest engagement fan campaigns in K-pop history. But the raw numbers, as staggering as they were, only told part of the story. What distinguished this campaign from every previous Stay mobilization was its strategic sophistication and its real-world impact. Stay didn't just defend Bangchan, they built a case for systemic change. Fan-organized open letters were sent not just to the implicated designer's brand, but to every major fashion house that had engaged K-pop idols as guests or ambassadors. The letters, drafted collaboratively across time zones and languages, articulated a demand that went beyond individual accountability. They called for fashion weeks and industry events to establish formal codes of conduct regarding the treatment of celebrity guests from non-Western entertainment industries, arguing that the casual xenophobia embedded in remarks like, "Go back to your music videos," reflected a structural problem, not just a personal failing. Step back from the individual stories for a moment and look at what just happened across this list. 8 members. 8 insults. 8 moments where the global fashion establishment aimed its oldest, most deeply ingrained weapons: gatekeeping, body shaming, xenophobia, elitism, erasure at young men who had the audacity to show up in spaces they were told they didn't deserve. And 8 times, Stay didn't just fight back. They rewrote the terms of engagement entirely. What connects every single entry on this list isn't anger, it's intelligence. Stay didn't win these battles with harassment or pile-ons. They won with curated evidence, art history, data analysis, professional letter writing campaigns, fashion theory, and cultural criticism so sharp that industry professionals were forced to engage with it on its merits. They turned fandom into scholarship. They turned outrage into advocacy. They turned viral moments into structural change. And look at what Stray Kids themselves did in response, or rather, what they didn't do. Not a single member publicly attacked the designers who insulted them. Not one retaliatory post, not one bitter interview, not one moment of stooping to the level of the people who tried to diminish them. I.N kept showing up. Hyunjin kept painting. Felix kept glowing. Seungmin kept being effortlessly himself. Changbin kept filling his clothes with unapologetic strength. Minho kept refusing to be categorized. Han kept feeling everything out loud. And Bangchan kept walking into rooms, quietly, gracefully, and holding the door open behind him. That's the real lesson of this list. The fashion world didn't just underestimate Stray Kids' style, it underestimated their character. And it catastrophically underestimated the fandom that stands behind them. Stay proved, 8 times over, that the most powerful force in modern pop culture isn't the designer behind the garment or the editor behind the magazine. It's the community behind the artist, a community that shows up with receipts, with creativity, with relentless love, and with the one thing no amount of industry prestige can buy: loyalty that doesn't flinch. So the next time a designer considers making an offhand remark about a Stray Kids member, here's the only fashion advice they'll ever need: don't. See you, Stay.